Welcome to today's root word lesson. Today we're going to take a look at a root that can appear in 4 different ways. Loose, spelled L-U-S or L-U-C, and loom or loon. All 4 of these different forms are the same root, which means light. By light, we mean things that shine, not the other light that means the opposite of heavy. This root comes from Latin, so right away, if I am familiar with a Latin-based language such as Spanish, French, Portuguese, Italian, or Romanian, I should try to see if I can make a connection with this root and that language. Let's see how I can make that connection with Spanish. So, since this is the root for light, I automatically think, well, what is the Spanish word for light? And the Spanish word for light is luz. So I see that and think, wow, that's actually really close to this spelling of the root up here. Now I think, well, that reminds me that the Spanish word for lights is luces. That's just the plural of luz, but it actually changed the spelling to look like this appearance of the root here. And this here reminds me that the Spanish word for the moon is luna. So maybe that's related to this root because the moon is really bright. That's a pretty good language connection. Now, I want to see if I can make this connection with English. And I think, well, what are some words that I know that have this root in them in English? Maybe I've never thought about that before. So I need to take some time and think, well, lose, loom, loon, Well, I know this word, luminescent, that I've heard before, and I know it's an adjective that means like giving off light. So, that actually makes sense now that I know that loom means light, and there's this loom in here. So this loom also makes me think of, in Harry Potter, there's this spell that the students cast to make light come out of their wands, and that spell is called lumos. And I'm not sure if that's a real word, so I'm going to put it in quotes here, but it actually makes a lot of sense that if this means light, the spell makes light. So now that I've sort of familiarized myself with this root and some words in English that I know that use this root, I'm going to now see how I can use this knowledge to help me figure out the meanings of new words while I'm reading. So here I have a couple of practice questions. They're going to test and see if I can use my knowledge of this root to figure out new words. The practice says, use what you know to figure out the meaning of the underlined word. Well, it sounds like something I can do. Number 1. If American settlers could not afford glass for windows, they sometimes used paper rubbed with oil because it was translucent. Well, right away I see here's this new word that I don't know. And I see, here's loose, and I just learned that loose means light. So I'm going to write here a little note for myself to remind myself of what I just learned. And now I'm going to see if I can use my plug-in strategy to figure out what this word means. First of all, I can look at this word and see if there's anything else in any of the roots or affixes in this word that are familiar to me, but let's say that I don't know what trans means yet, so I can't use that to help me. I'm going to move right on to that plug-in strategy by covering this up and plugging in another word that would make the sentence make sense. So, let me read the sentence again. If American settlers could not afford glass for windows, Okay. They sometimes use paper rubbed with oil because it was Well, in this sentence, the settlers are trying to put something in their windows. And, glass is clear. So let's see if that makes sense in this sentence. So they sometimes, instead of using glass, the settlers sometimes use paper rubbed with oil because it was clear. Well, I know from experience, like when I, drip oil on paper, it does get kind of clear and the light can go through. And that actually, having something clear in the window would really make sense. So I'm going to say that translucent means clear. But I don't want to just stop there. I want to test and see if this actually makes sense with what I know about the word. So since I know loose means light, I want to come up with a definition that uses light. So they use paper rubbed with oil because it could let the light through. So I know that translucent should mean able to let light through. Great. That's a really clear definition. Now, I feel pretty confident about that, so I'm going to move down to number 2. Number 2 says, I didn't understand the question, so I asked my teacher to elucidate its meaning. So once again, I see this loose root in here, and I'm going to once again write light above it to remind myself that this has to do with light. I don't really know much about the rest of the word, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to my plug it in strategy by trying to think of another word that could go here. So I didn't understand the question, so I asked my teacher to its meaning. Well, if I don't understand something, I'm going to want somebody to explain it to me, so I think elucidate must mean explain. But I need to check and make sure this makes sense by using my root that I've learned here. So, light. How could this have something to do with light? Well, after I think about it for a moment, I know that in English there's this idiom to shed light on something, which means like to make it clear or to explain it, because if you can't see something in the dark, you can't understand it. So to put light or shed light on something makes it so you can see it. Okay, well, that fits in with explain, so I'm going to just add that to my definition. To elucidate also means to shed light on something. Great. So that's how I've used my knowledge about this new root that means light to figure out the meaning of new words.